Hi everyone, welcome. I'm out here in my yard, and as you can see, my outdoor worm bag is a little bit damp. There was a whole bunch of rain last night, and there's more rain on the way later today. For any of you who follow my channel regularly, you're probably wondering, well, didn't we just feed this system recently? And we did. It was only 6 days ago that this system was last fed, and normally we don't really check in so frequently on especially this outdoor worm bag. Usually we allow a little bit of time to pass between feedings, but there was a little bit of a kind of a novelty feeding applied to this system last time, and that novelty feeding was a nice kind of a pastry. Oh my goodness, look at that. It was a fruit pastry, something I don't think I've seen before. Is the worms actually kind of collecting up here on the side of the bag, right up where the moisture had been collecting, I guess, on that plywood top. And it's funny because this material is sort of I guess it's what's referred to as a non-woven fabric, and the worms seem to kind of work their way into the material, so it's not just a matter of me knocking them off, because they could have actually climbed in to some of the little loops of the material. So if I were to try to pull these little guys off here, I could easily tear them in half. So I'm not going to fiddle with the worms hanging out on the walls of the bag. It just seems a little bit unusual because I don't think I've seen that before. Oh, and we do have an intruder in here. An intruder, which I guess in an outdoor system is, I guess, not a big deal, but it was a centipede. Centipedes normally, if you find them in your wormery, for example, it's worth removing them. So the pastry, the fruit pastry, was placed right here in the middle of the system, not very deep. We only sprinkled a little bit of material onto the top, and the idea here was that if we were to come back soon, we might actually encounter a little bit of a worm party going on here with the worms huddling together to enjoy the delicious pastry. And after 6 days, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I didn't know if there would be leftovers, and there definitely is. I'm already seeing parts of the crust and other things. Actually, what's right here is one of the old leftovers that we keep bumping into over and over. Here is part of a mango seed. I guess we must have returned some of the older leftover items that were in here back down alongside the pastry. But the mango seed's not the reason we're here. The reason we're here was to see how this fruit pastry is being received by the worms, and they're definitely enjoying it. There's worms all over this thing, but there's also quite a bit of leftover. I contemplated how long I would want to wait before coming back in here, but we did resolve to come back soon during the last check-in, just to see if we're able to encounter a worm party coming out to feast on the yummy pastry. So there's definitely worms hanging out all over here. I could even smell the scent of the berries that make up this stuff. But it does seem to me like they've taken a pretty good bite out of the food. While there's still a good amount of leftover, it does seem to me like they've managed to consume a good portion of it. So I think the spectacle that we were hoping to observe was, to a certain degree, seen here, with worms hanging out all over the place, coming out to enjoy the yummy, sweet, fruit-filled pastry. I would have to guess that they probably like the crust too, because that's just, you know, sort of a bread, sort of a starchy food too, I assume. So that was kind of the idea here, was to come back into this bin at some point soon after the last check-in to see how they're doing. Another thing that we resolved to do last time was to come equipped with a good amount of bedding, and I did actually go down to my wormery to bring up some of my most recently shredded materials, which are It might not seem like much because it's in this little paper bag, but I did attempt to cram it in there tight, so the stuff is jammed in here pretty tight. So it is a pretty generous portion of the stuff that I make my prepared bedding out of. Usually it's just shredded paper and cardboard. My prepared bedding also usually includes leaf fragments and moisture, but this is just the shredded dry cardboard and paper. It seemed to me like after all the rain we just got, perhaps this system would be already damp enough to not need a dampened bedding type material. So it seemed to me like placing in dry stuff might be a good idea. And then I've also got just an assortment of different things from my freezer to give them as a little snack too. And I think maybe the other reason we thought that coming in here a few times with a good ample amount of bedding was that I guess they worked through most of the stuff that the system was built with, and it's becoming kind of shallow. There's not a lot of digging that has to be done before I start encountering the bottom of the bag here. So let's not prolong what I came out here to do. We're going to drop in the bedding. I just wanted to make sure I had a large enough hole down here to place it all into, because I did cram it in tight, and I figured once I start placing it in here, it's going to expand, and if I didn't have a large enough hole, then I'd have just a whole bunch of stuff coming out the surface here. So it does seem like we've managed to fill this hole that I dug with the bedding I bought up. And I also thought that perhaps this little bag could just be sort of opened up and become sort of a top covering. Top coverings are things that I do in my systems downstairs in my wormery, but not so often out here. I mean, sometimes we do. Sometimes we put like a cardboard covering over the material, but I figured since I have a solid sheet of paper here in my hands, why not spread it open and create a top covering for this system, for the worms to have sort of a little carbon-based top material to hang out on. And I guess if I had paid closer attention, I could have taken these larger chunks of leftover material and sort of kept it in one place so that it could all be returned back down into the feeding area. I failed to do that. I just sort of excavated haphazardly. So there are little chunks of stuff here and there, but I guess if it's not returned back down into the feeding area, that's fine. The worms will figure it out. They'll find it and eat it. So why don't we leave it at that? Why don't we set the paper aside briefly so I can grab the foods that I came out here with and drop them in. So you can see I've included a couple corn cobs. This stuff is all frozen. Here we've also got a little bit of potato peel, as well as the peels off some squash. And there's even some lemon peel in here too. So not a terribly huge feeding. I think the star of the show here is actually the bedding, of which there is actually a pretty significant quantity. So I think we're more or less done here. I think we'll just use the covering up activity here as a reason to see if we can perhaps grab some material from the outer edges just to see what it looks like after a night of rain. Because, you know, with that top covering, the piece of plywood, the plywood prevents moisture from landing in the middle of the container. It sends all the moisture around the edges, and I guess that's the reason the worms are all hanging out on the walls of the bag, trying to come up for some of that lovely moisture. Although it seems unusual because the material in the bin is actually quite damp too. And it does seem like once we fluff things up, the level of the bin comes up a little bit, but it does seem like there's room in here for more bedding if we were to set our sights in the next visit to include more. So perhaps we'll do that next check-in too. So let's bring back the top coverings. Oh yeah, duh, what am I talking about? Here's the top covering I made reference to earlier. I knew we were doing it, I just kind of spaced out on it. But it is getting worked down pretty good, so perhaps a supplementary top covering is in order so that they've got additional stuff to nibble on there. Alright everyone, that's it for our check-in. I got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. That stuff's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.